So I want you to imagine the ultimate disco scene. Just close your eyes and picture it. You're probably picturing, I don't know, a really sweaty, packed underground club in 1970s New York, or maybe
sun-drenched beach in Ibiza or something.
Exactly. Sun, heat, massive crowds. But today, we are actually taking you somewhere completely unexpected. We are stripping away the palm trees, the crowded city streets, and we're dropping you into the freezing, dark, and just utterly serene landscapes of Norway.
Specifically the 2000s, yeah. It's a completely wild contrast.
It really is. And the mission of today's deep dive is to explore exactly how that cold, quiet, super isolated environment managed to produce some of the warmest, most expansive dance music of the 21st century.
Right, which is a genre the world eventually came to know as Nordic cosmic disco.
Which is just a great name. And to map out this whole journey, we are using a really in-depth column from Monumental Movement Records, or MMR. This is basically our primary roadmap for the deep dive today.
Yeah, the column does a brilliant job tracing the lineage of the whole movement. It breaks down the key artists, the essential albums.
And we're also pulling insights from a documentary that the source cites pretty heavily called Northern Disco Lights, which is great because it gives us the visual and historical context of how this scene literally grew in the dark.
Literally in the dark, yeah.
Okay, let's unpack this because we need to figure out how we get from the glittering mirror balls of Studio 54 to the frozen fjords of Scandinavia.
Well, the crucial first step is that we have to stop thinking about disco as a specific historical event that just, lived and died in 1970s America.
Right. It's not just a time capsule.
Exactly. We have to view it as a sonic toolkit. These Norwegian producers, they basically took the foundational tools of disco, the steady four-on-the-floor beat, the driving bass lines, the soaring synthesizers, and they applied them to their own extreme environmental reality.
But before we even meet the specific artists who pioneered this, I think we first need to understand the fundamental contradiction at the heart of this music. Because it's wild. How do you actually build warm sounds in a place that is just famously bitterly cold?
It's the central tension of the whole genre.
Yeah. And when I was reading through the MMR column and actually listening to the tracks they recommended, a really specific image popped into my head. Listening to this music is it's like sitting by a crackling, beautifully warm analog fire, but you're inside a vast echoing ice cave.
Oh, I love that. That is a phenomenal way to visualize what the source actually refers to as texture aesthetics.
Texture aesthetics.
Yeah. It is the absolute defining characteristic of Norwegian cosmic disco. So let's actually look at the mechanics of your metaphor, starting with the ice cave part.
Okay, yeah.
In audio production, the illusion of space is typically created through time-based effects, so primarily reverb and delay.
Right, and just for anyone listening who might be unfamiliar, reverb is essentially the artificial simulation of a sound wave leaving an instrument, traveling across a room, bouncing off a hard surface, and then returning to your ear, like a fraction of a second later.
That's exactly the concept. But these producers take it to an absolute extreme. They became famous for their incredibly heavy, almost exaggerated application of reverb.
But drenching everything in it.
Totally, because they aren't trying to simulate a small, sweaty club. They're creating these massive, expansive auditory spaces that directly mirror the geographical expanse of Norway itself.
Wow, so the landscape is literally shaping the mix.
Exactly. Think of the deep, echoing fjords, the towering mountains, vast stretches of just uninhabited snow. The music sounds utterly huge, but in a very serene, isolated way. That heavy spatial emptiness, that's your ice cave.
And here's the thing, an ice cave is inherently hostile. Right? It's freezing, it's lonely. You wouldn't want to just hang out in a purely cold, echoing space for an hour.
No, you'd freeze. Which brings us to the fire in your metaphor. The warmth in this music comes from the highly specific instrumentation they place inside that massive echoing space.
Because they're not using digital.
Right. Instead of using cold, sharp, perfectly precise digital synthesizers, these producers became utterly obsessed with vintage analog equipment.
And there is a real physical difference there, which I think people forget, because digital synthesis is, at the end of the day, just ones and zeros. It's perfectly clean, flawless computer code.
Right.
But analog gear runs actual physical electrical voltage through copper wires and physical resistors.
And because it relies on physical components, it's inherently imperfect.
The electricity fluctuates slightly.
Exactly. The circuits heat up over time. And that physical process creates a subtle harmonic distortion and these tiny micro variations that our human ears naturally interpret as warmth. or, thickness.
So they take these incredibly warm, physically vibrating analog synthesizers, they pair them with these rich, organic, hand-played percussion sounds, and then they drop them into the middle of that massive, cold, reverberating digital space.
And that tension right there, between the vast freezing environment and the intimate glowing instrumentation, that is the signature flavor of the whole genre.
That's brilliant.
And I actually want you to consider the psychology of that for a second. Think about how your own physical environment shapes the work you do. If you live in a place where the winters are intensely long and dark and freezing, you are forced to spend a significant portion of your life indoors.
You're biologically going to crave warmth.
Precisely. Building a lush, tropical auditory escape from a brutal climate isn't just a fun stylistic experiment for them. It is a psychological necessity. They aren't pretending they live in Miami. They are manufacturing the heat they need to survive the snow.
Man, that's a really powerful way to look at it. So now that we understand the physics of this ice cave and fireplace sound, we need to meet the architects who actually built it. Because that delicate balance of warmth and massive space, it didn't just happen by accident.
Yeah, it was very deliberate.
Yeah, and the MMR column points us to two foundational pioneers who basically authored the rulebook for this whole thing, Prins Thomas and Lindstrøm.
Yeah. If you are discussing Norwegian disco, these two are the absolute pillars. They are the North Stars of the entire movement.
So let's start with Prins Thomas, whose real name is Thomas Moen Hermansen, by the way. The source outlines his roots as being incredibly diverse, like he's pulling inspiration from the mechanical pulse of Detroit techno, the synthetic melodrama of 1980s Italo disco, and the lush orchestration of original 70s disco. But his methodology is really what sets him apart, right? He is described as a master of the long psychedelic buildup, and he relies heavily on modular synthesizers.
Oh, modular deer is a fascinating beast.
It looks insane.
It does. For those who haven't seen it, a modular synthesizer looks like an old 1950s telephone switchboard. It doesn't have a standard piano keyboard. It's just a massive wall of separate electronic modules. And the artist has to physically connect them using dozens of patch cables to literally route the electricity and create a sound from scratch.
Which makes the music inherently live and totally unrepeatable. You can't just hit save on a physical patch cable.
Exactly. It forces the producer to be fully present and physical with the machine. And Prins Thomas is very much a purist in that regard. He cultivated the vibe of this entire movement from the ground up, not in massive stadium raves, but through his live DJ sets at small, intimate festivals and local clubs.
Building a community.
Right. He built a dedicated community that actually appreciated that physical analog craftsmanship.
And the source specifically highlights two of his major solo albums for anyone wanting to experience this firsthand. There's his self-titled album, Prins Thomas, from 2010, and his delightfully simply named follow-up, 70, released in 2012.
Now, while Prins Thomas was heavily focused on that localized DJ culture and the analog patching, his contemporary Lindstrøm, real name Hans-Peter Lindstrøm, he was taking the sound into slightly different territory, much more expansive.
Yeah, the column literally refers to Lindstrøm as the flag bearer of cosmic disco.
Yeah.
So how does his approach differ from, the purist methodology of Prins Thomas?
Lindström's signature really lies in his masterful juxtaposition of elements. He pairs incredibly heavy, driving, propulsive drum work with these ethereal, almost cinematic synthesizer layers.
Oh, so it's a bit more grand.
Much more grandiose. He leans much harder into the melodic side. And he's also the figure who truly extended the reach of the Norwegian sound onto the global stage.
He wasn't just doing the underground clubs.
Right. He was crossing over, he remixed popular indie rock bands, he collaborated extensively with female vocalists, and he even produced bespoke music for high-end runway fashion events.
Proving the versatility of the sound. The recommended starting points for him, according to the source, are his 2006 album, It's a Fidelity Affair, and his sprawling 2008 masterpiece, Where You Go, I Go Too.
And what's fascinating here is that Prins Thomas and Lindstrøm did not view each other as competition.
Real?
No, they weren't fighting for a singular crown at all. Their relationship was deeply, profoundly symbiotic.
They kind of functioned more like a joint research and development lab. I mean, they co-produced tracks, they released split records, they relentlessly remixed each other's material.
Bouncing ideas back and forth constantly.
And by doing that, they expanded the very vocabulary of what space disco could even be.
And a massive defining part of that vocabulary, which the MMR column spends a lot of time analyzing, is a concept they call long track culture.
Okay, let's really dig into this because it flies in the face of everything we expect from commercial music. When most people think of a dance hit, they think of a punchy, tightly compressed 3.5-minute song that just rushes to the vocal chorus as fast as humanly possible to hook the listener.
Yeah, modern pop and club music is entirely engineered for immediate dopamine gratification. But Nordic cosmic disco explicitly rejects that premise. Long track culture is literally a philosophy of patience.
Right.
These artists are regularly releasing tracks that clock in at 8, 10, 15 minutes long.
I mean, the title track of Lindstrøm's, Where You Go, I Go Too, is nearly 30 minutes long.
30 minutes?
How on earth does a producer keep someone dancing, or even just listening, for 30 minutes without a traditional vocal chorus to anchor them?
The mechanism they use is the mastery of microvariations. Because the track is so long, the producer doesn't have to rush anything. They can introduce a simple, muted bass thump at minute 1. Then, over the course of the next 4 minutes, they might slowly, almost imperceptibly, open up a low-pass filter on the synthesizer.
So the sound gradually gains high frequencies. What starts as a muffled underwater thud slowly transforms into this sharp, buzzing, aggressive lead line.
And your ear barely notices the change until it has completely taken over the sonic landscape. It is entirely about the mechanics of tension and release. You let the tension build for 7 minutes before the main bass line finally drops.
Which again mirrors the landscape. You don't sprint through a massive fjord.
Yeah.
You take it in slowly, observing how the light shifts over time.
Exactly.
But, whenever a musical movement establishes a strict, elegant set of rules, like the patient, ambient, deeply serious space disco of Prins Thomas and Lindstrøm, the immediate next generation is practically obligated to rebel against it.
Of course.
If the founders built a sleek, pristine spaceship for a tranquil cosmic journey, our next act essentially hot-wired that spaceship and joyrided it through a chaotic asteroid belt.
Which brings us to Mongolian Jet Set.
Okay, I have to be completely honest here. I really want to push back on this group. I looked at the track lists and the descriptions of Mongolian Jet Set in the source material, and it sounds like an absolute train wreck.
Lassie, I know what you mean.
I mean, they are mixing 1970s Italian disco bass lines with Nigerian Afrobeat percussion, jazz saxophones, and progressive rock guitars. That sounds like a novelty act. It sounds like a gimmick, to be frank. Why should we take this seriously as a structural piece of art rather than just an exercise in chaotic noise?
Look, it's a completely fair critique on paper. It absolutely should be a chaotic mess. The only reason it actually functions as high art is because of the incredibly specific two-headed dynamic of the duo.
Okay.
Mongolian Jet Set is a DJ and producer unit, and it requires both brains to keep the train on the tracks. Let's look at brain number 1, Paul Nyhus, who operates under the alias Strange Fruit.
Strange Fruit is the DJ, the turntablist, and the selector. And the source notes he's a massive, highly respected figure in the Norwegian underground. He's kind of the eccentric crate digger with the encyclopedic record collection.
Right, and his role in the partnership is to be the visionary wildcard. He is the one breaking down the genre walls, aggressively pulling in those disparate global influences you mentioned, the Afrobeat, the jazz, the weird experimental rock. He brings the raw, chaotic ingredients.
Which brings us to brain number 2, Knut Sævik.
Sævik is the producer and the studio engineer, and crucially, he has a deep background in formal jazz and classical music. He is the structural genius of the operation.
So think of it like a master chef attempting a really bizarre fusion dish. Strange Fruit walks into the kitchen and drops a pile of ingredients on the table that have no business being together, like a fine cut of beef, some incredibly spicy foreign peppers, and a handful of sweet fruit.
And if you just throw them in a pan, it's garbage.
Right. But Sævik uses his classical training, the foundational sauce of music theory, synthesis, and precise programming, to bind those ingredients together into something completely cohesive and deeply complex.
And that structural mastery is most evident in what the source calls their 10-minute space travel remixes, because they don't approach a remix by simply putting a louder dance beat under the original vocal.
No, they completely dismantle the structural architecture of the original song.
Exactly. They will take a 2-second vocal hook from the middle of the track, stretch it out, loop it over a tribal drum pattern, inject a progressive rock guitar solo, and turn a standard 3-minute pop song into a bizarre 10-minute psychedelic odyssey.
It's insane. And the column highly recommends their 2006 album Schlungs and a 2009 release that arguably wins the award for the best title in this entire deep dive.
Yeah.
We gave it all away, and now we are taking it back.
which perfectly encapsulates their ethos. They take the technical construction of the music incredibly seriously, but they refuse to take themselves seriously.
Now, because Mongolian jet set was so aggressively pulling in sounds from all over the world, it forces us to look at the broader context, because how did this supposedly isolated Norwegian scene actually interact with the rest of the globe?
Well, if we connect this to the bigger picture, we see a heavy reliance on what the MMR column calls cross-cultural quotes. The Norwegian producers never pretended they were operating in a vacuum.
No, they were super aware of what was going on.
Very aware. They were actively curating the world's dance music, but filtering it through their specific Nordic lens. So they heavily borrowed from the French touch scene, for example.
And French touch is famous for artists like Daft Punk, who utilized incredibly heavy audio compression. For the listener, compression essentially squashes the dynamic range of a sound, so it makes the quietest parts louder and the loudest parts quieter.
Right.
And when pushed to the extreme, it creates this incredible breathing, pumping effect that makes the whole track feel alive.
And the Norwegians totally adopted that pumping compression, but they also pulled from the synthetic melodies of Italo disco, and they incorporated traditional Asian and Middle Eastern scales into their synths.
The source even mentions a collaboration with an artist named Randy Barracuda, who is a pioneer of the Finnish squee scene.
Squee, yeah.
Which is essentially a microgenre from Finland and Sweden that combines rudimentary synthesizer leads with funk and R&B rhythms. It just shows that Norway was constantly trading ideas with other microscenes all across Scandinavia.
And this cultural exchange wasn't just happening anonymously on the internet either. There was a vital physical infrastructure to this movement, which really brings us to the documentary Northern Disco Lights.
Subtitled, The Rise and Rise of Norwegian Dance Music.
Yes. And the documentary highlights a massive aha moment for understanding this genre, because it traces the origins of this cosmic movement back to a specific northern city, Tromsø.
And Tromsø's geography is the ultimate key to unlocking this music. It is located hundreds of miles above the Arctic Circle, so during the winter, the city experiences the polar night.
Right.
Which is a period of roughly 2 months where the sun literally never rises above the horizon.
Just imagine the psychological impact of that. When you live in 24-hour darkness, the standard societal markers of time completely dissolve. Morning, noon, and night basically stop meaning anything.
That's exactly the point. When time loses its rigid structure, a 30-minute dance track suddenly makes perfect logical sense.
Exactly. And the extreme environment fostered a highly tight-knit, localized community. The documentary shows how that isolation actually forced them to build their own local clubs, start their own independent labels, and cultivate a unique party culture that eventually birthed artists like Prins Thomas and Lindstrøm.
And to truly appreciate how wild it is that this localized sound from the dark reaches of Tromsø became a global phenomenon, we really have to contextualize the era. The MMR column is a snapshot of the music landscape of the 2000s. Just look at the other artists floating around in that exact same editorial space.
It was an era of unprecedented global cross-pollination.
Completely. You have The Rapture, a New York band pioneering the dance punk movement, aggressively mixing jagged post-punk guitars with acid house beats. You have Zongdamin, a UK-based Japanese artist making incredibly quirky, bass-heavy electronic music. You have Armand van Helden, a massive titan of vocal house music out of the United States.
The Norwegian scene was a vital organ within that massive global web. The producers in Tromsø and Oslo were absorbing the gritty dance punk from New York and the pumping house from Europe, and those international producers were, in turn, heavily influenced by the patient 10-minute space disco tracks radiating out of Norway.
And the ultimate genius of the Norwegian producers is that they actively participated in this massive global conversation, but they never lost their accent. They maintained that unique Nordic flavor, that massive ice cave and crackling analog fire, even while trading sounds with the rest of the world.
They proved that it is totally possible to be deeply, stubbornly rooted in your local geography while simultaneously speaking a universal musical language.
Which brings us to the big question. So, what does this all mean for you? Why should you care about a niche dance music movement from Norway in the 2000s?
It's a valid question.
For me, the most profound takeaway is the value of that long track culture we talked about. We currently live in an attention economy that is absolutely obsessed with the microhook. We are socially conditioned to consume 15-second viral audio clips. Our attention spans are constantly being fractured into smaller and smaller pieces.
The modern audio diet is essentially a series of hollow snacks.
Yes. Exactly. And the Norwegian disco scene teaches us the immense value of sitting down for a full meal. It teaches us the psychological value of patience. There's something deeply therapeutic about letting a 15-minute track slowly build around you. It demands that you physically slow down, that you observe how an atmosphere develops, and that you actually surrender to the journey rather than just anxiously waiting for the next immediate dopamine drop.
It requires active, intentional listening rather than just, passive consumption. And that actually brings up a fascinating paradox that I want to leave you with today. The source material makes it clear that Norwegian disco achieved international acclaim precisely because it synthesized the world. They took French compression, African percussion, Italo melodies, and filtered them through their cold, Nordic environment.
We've built a localized sound out of global ingredients.
Right. But here is the puzzle to ponder. We now live in a hyper-globalized, entirely digital world. Today, a teenager with a laptop in literally any city on Earth can instantly access every sample, every instrument, and every genre in human history with a Wi-Fi connection. You no longer need Strange Fruit's massive physical record collection to explore global sounds.
You don't even need the physical analog synthesizers anymore because you can download a digital plugin that perfectly mimics that warm distortion.
Precisely the point. So the provocative question is this. In our fully connected digital era, does geographical location even matter to music creation anymore? Does the extreme physical isolation of a place like Tromsø still have the power to forge a genuinely unique genre? Or is the Nordic sound, that beautiful, tension-filled balance between freezing digital space and warm analog fire, no longer a physical place you have to endure, but simply a state of mind that anyone, anywhere in the world, can now download and access?
Wow. Is the ice cave a geographic reality or just a preset on your laptop? That is a fantastic, complex question to chew on.
It really is.
Well, thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Our strong recommendation to you today is simple. Carve out some intentional time. Put on your best pair of headphones, fire up a 10, 15, or even 30-minute Lindstrøm track, and actually take the journey. Let that massive echoing reverb wash over you. See if you can feel the heat of that crackling analog fire bouncing off the icy walls of the track.
You definitely will.
Until next time, keep exploring the sounds out there.